1 in 3 adults over the age of 50 wakes up already tired, not sleepy, tired, a heaviness that starts in the legs and settles into the bones by 10 in the morning, the kind of fatigue that coffee cannot touch and a full night of sleep does not fix. That 1 in 3 figure comes from the same source I'll lean on throughout. According to data reviewed by the National Institute on Aging, persistent, unexplained fatigue is one of the most common complaints doctors hear from patients past 50, and it is one of the most consistently misdiagnosed. Here is what almost no one is told. When you carry that bone-deep exhaustion to your physician, the workup usually starts and ends with your thyroid and your iron. Blood panel, thyroid-stimulating hormone, ferritin. Done. And for a large share of tired adults over 50, all 3 come back normal. You are told your labs look fine. You are told it is stress or age, or that you simply need to move more. And the reason this happens is not that your doctor is careless. It is that the standard fatigue panel was built to catch the loud, obvious causes, the anemias and the underactive thyroids that turn up in a single blood draw. It was never designed to see the slow, quiet decline that happens one layer deeper, at the level of the cell. So, when those loud causes are absent, the panel goes silent, and silence gets translated into, "You are fine." But the organ generating your fatigue may not be your thyroid at all. In many cases, the real source is much smaller than a gland. It sits inside nearly every cell in your body, and it has a name most people over 50 have never heard spoken by their own doctor. It is called the mitochondrion. And there is a specific cellular switch that governs how many working mitochondria you build, how much energy they produce, and whether you spend your 60s feeling capable or feeling like you are dragging a body that no longer answers you. That switch is the subject of everything that follows. Here is exactly what I am going to walk you through in the next 25 minutes. Promise number 1 is the single blood marker, one your standard fatigue panel almost never includes, that can flag failing cellular energy years before you feel it in your bones. Promise number 2 is the name of the master switch that controls mitochondrial building, a molecule called PGC1-alpha, and the plain language reason its activity tends to fade after 50. Promise number 3 is the specific reason your legs feel heaviest, tied to a muscle fiber type that starts vanishing in your 50s, and what that has to do with the switch. Promise number 4 is the exact at-home movement pattern, no equipment, no gym, that research links to flipping this switch back on, and how many minutes it actually takes. And promise number 5 is the single most common mistake tired adults make, the one that convinces your cells to shut down energy production even harder, which I see mentioned almost nowhere in mainstream fatigue advice. Before I go further, a quick word about who is talking. I make evidence-informed health explainers for adults over 50, the people who feel dismissed by a 7-minute appointment and want the actual mechanism, not a pat on the shoulder. Everything here is drawn from published physiology, not from a persona, and it is educational only. If this reaches even one person carrying this kind of fatigue and gives them a real thread to pull, the work is worth it. If that is you, the like and the subscribe genuinely help this get in front of more people who need it. Let me tell you about Eleanor, because she is exactly typical of the person this affects. Eleanor is 63. She lives outside Sacramento in the house she and her husband bought 30 years ago. For most of her life, she was, in her own words, the one with the energy. She raised 2 kids, ran a small bookkeeping business out of the spare bedroom and walked 2 miles every morning, before the neighborhood was awake. Around the age of 58, something changed, and it changed slowly enough that she almost did not notice. The morning walk became every other morning, then twice a week. Then she stopped, because by the time she got to the end of the block, her legs felt like they were filled with wet sand, and she wanted to sit down. She was sleeping 7, sometimes 8 hours. She was not depressed. She was, in every way she could describe, simply out of fuel. And here is the detail that matters, because it is the tell. Her fatigue was not worse on the days she did more. It was worse the more she rested. A day spent on the couch left her feeling heavier the next morning, not lighter, which is the exact opposite of what ordinary tiredness does. That reversal, where rest makes it worse instead of better, is one of the quiet signatures of an energy system that has stopped being asked to produce, and it is almost never recognized for what it is. Her doctor ran the standard panel. Thyroid stimulating hormone, normal. Ferritin, normal on the low end but inside the reference range. Vitamin D, slightly low, and she was told to take a supplement. Everything else, in the doctor's words, looked great for her age. She was told to try to exercise more and to manage her stress. Eleanor left that appointment feeling something worse than sick. She felt dismissed, and she felt like the exhaustion was somehow her fault. And notice what her ferritin actually did there. Normal on the low end, inside the reference range, is a phrase that can hide a real problem, because reference ranges are built around the average of a population, not around what an individual cell needs to make energy efficiently. A ferritin sitting near the bottom of the range can, in some adults, leave mitochondria short of the iron they use to run their electron transport chain. The research here is still emerging, and yet it will be read aloud as normal and dismissed in the same breath. Eleanor was told a number was fine when that number may quietly have been part of the story. Over the next 18 months, it got worse. She turned down a trip to see her granddaughter's graduation in Oregon because the thought of the drive and the walking exhausted her before she even packed. She started sitting for most of the day, which felt like relief in the moment and made everything worse over time. By the time I would describe her situation, she had lost noticeable muscle in her thighs and her arms. She was napping in the afternoon, and she had begun to accept, quietly, that this was just what getting old felt like. And each of those changes fed the next. The lost thigh muscle meant fewer mitochondria to burn fuel, which meant less energy, which meant more sitting, which meant more lost muscle. This is what physiologists call a feed-forward loop, a spiral where every step down makes the next step down easier and the climb back up steeper. Eleanor was not sliding because she was weak. She was sliding because the system, once it tips past a certain point, is built to keep sliding, unless something interrupts it. Here is why I am starting with Eleanor. Eleanor was not lazy, and Eleanor was not old before her time. Eleanor's cells were producing less energy, her mitochondrial machinery was winding down, and the single most damaging thing that happened to her was not the fatigue itself. It was being told her labs were normal, because that one sentence sent her home to sit down. And sitting down, as you are about to see, is precisely the instruction that tells this cellular switch to stay off. What happened to Eleanor is happening right now to millions of adults over 50 who have been handed a clean lab report and no explanation. So let me explain the mechanism, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. and you will understand your own body better than most of the appointments you have ever sat through. Inside almost every cell in your body sit tiny structures called mitochondria. You may remember the phrase from a biology class decades ago, the powerhouse of the cell. That phrase is correct, and it is also underselling it. A single, hard-working muscle cell can hold hundreds to thousands of mitochondria, and in a fit person, they can make up a third of the volume of that muscle fiber. Mitochondria take the food you eat and the oxygen you breathe and turn them into a molecule called ATP, which is the actual currency of energy your muscles, your brain, and your heart spend every second you are alive. To put a number on how much you depend on it, researchers estimate you make and spend something on the order of roughly your entire body weight in ATP over the course of a day, recycling the same molecules again and again, because you only ever hold a few seconds worth at any moment. When you feel energetic, you are feeling abundant ATP. When you feel bone-deep fatigue with normal labs, there is a strong chance you are feeling mitochondria that are too few in number or too damaged to keep up with demand. Now here is the part they skip. The number of mitochondria in your cells is not fixed. Your body is constantly building new ones and clearing out old damaged ones through a housekeeping process called mitophagy, which literally means eating the broken mitochondria so their parts can be recycled. This building process has a master switch, a molecular controller that turns on the genes that manufacture fresh mitochondria. Its name, as I promised, is PGC1 alpha, and the activity of this switch tends to decline with age and inactivity. It was first characterized in the late 1990s in the lab of Bruce Spiegelman at Harvard, who identified it as the co-activator that orchestrates this whole program. And the letters actually stand for something descriptive. Peroxisome proliferator activated receptor gamma co-activator 1 alpha. You do not need to memorize any of that. You need to understand what it does. When PGC1 alpha is active, it acts like a foreman calling a dozen crews to work at once, switching on the genes that build the components of new mitochondria, and your energy capacity rises. When PGC1 alpha goes quiet, the foreman goes home. Mitochondrial building slows. Old damaged mitochondria pile up because mitophagy also slows, and your energy capacity falls. Here is the problem with age. Research on aging muscle, including work published in journals of applied physiology, has found that the activity of this master switch tends to decline as we get older, and mitochondrial density in muscle drops along with it. Studies comparing the muscle of sedentary people in their 70s to that of people in their 20s have found meaningful reductions in mitochondrial content, on the order of a large fraction of what younger muscle carries. But here is the part that should reframe everything, because researchers, like those in the work of K. Srikumaran Nair at the Mayo Clinic, have shown that much of that decline tracks not with age alone, but with how much the muscle is being used. Master athletes in their 70s who kept training held on to mitochondrial function that looked far younger than their birthdays. That is the biology underneath the phrase everyone accepts without questioning, "I just do not have the energy I used to." It is not a mood. It is not a character flaw. It is, in many people, fewer and weaker cellular power plants and a master switch that has gone quiet. And a large share of that has to do with disuse, not the calendar. But, and this is the whole reason I am talking to you today, the switch is not broken. It is dormant. And the single most powerful signal known to turn PGC1 alpha back on is not a pill and not a supplement. It is a specific kind of demand you place on your muscles. When you make your muscles work in a particular way, they burn through their local ATP faster than they can replace it, and the byproducts pile up. Calcium floods the cell with each contraction, and an energy sensor called AMPK detects that the cell is running low on fuel. That combination sends a chemical distress signal that says, in effect, "We do not have enough energy for this. Build more power plants." That signal converges on PGC1 alpha and switches it on, and the cell responds by manufacturing new mitochondria. Physiologists call this mitochondrial biogenesis. You can call it turning the lights back on. And the elegant part is that the very sensation of effort, that burning, breathless, this is hard feeling in your legs, is the outward face of the exact chemistry that flips the switch. Now let me anchor this back to Eleanor. When Eleanor stopped walking and started sitting, she removed the exact demand signal her muscles needed to keep that switch active. Her AMPK sensors sat quiet because her cells never ran low on fuel since she never asked them to spend it. Her doctor's advice, try to exercise more, was not wrong in spirit. It was just far too vague to act on, and it missed the specific type of demand that actually moves this switch. Eleanor did not need to exercise more in general. She needed one precise thing. And I am going to give it to you. Let me widen this out because Eleanor is one face of a pattern, and you may recognize yourself more clearly in one of these next three. Consider Frank. Frank is 56, a retired long-haul driver living outside Kansas City. Frank's fatigue does not show up as heavy legs first. It shows up as a wall that hits him around 2 in the afternoon every single day. A crash so predictable, he plans his life around it. He assumed for years it was blood sugar, so he cut carbs, and it helped a little, and then it stopped helping. What Frank could not see is that decades of sitting behind a wheel gave his large leg muscles almost no reason to build mitochondria. Consider what his day actually was. 10 and 12-hour stretches with his legs still and his hands on a wheel. The largest muscles in his body idling for years on end. His afternoon wall is his cellular energy supply running dry earlier in the day than it should because the reserve capacity was never there. Think of it like a phone battery that has aged, the one that reads 50% and then dies 20 minutes later because the true capacity has quietly shrunk. Frank's cells hit that same false floor in the early afternoon. Frank is the case that shows fatigue is not always about what you eat. Sometimes it is about how few power plants you built over the years you spent sitting. Now consider Maria. Maria is 71 in Tampa, and on paper she is doing everything right. She walks, she eats well, she is not overweight, and she is still exhausted, which frustrates her more than anyone because she followed all the rules. Here is Maria's wrinkle. Steady, gentle, same-pace walking is wonderful for many things, but it is a fairly weak signal to the mitochondrial switch once your body is used to it. This is the principle of adaptation, and it is not a flaw, it is efficiency. Your body's entire goal is to make familiar tasks cost as little energy as possible. So once Maria's daily loop became easy, her muscles reorganized to do it without ever running low on fuel, which means the AMPK alarm never sounds. Comfortable, repetitive movement your body has fully adapted to stops shouting, "We need more energy," and starts whispering it. Maria did not need to walk more. She needed to change how she walked so that her muscles felt genuine, brief difficulty again. A few stretches where the effort outran the adaptation. Maria is the case that surprises people because she proves you can be active and still leave this switch mostly asleep. And then consider Walter. Walter is 68, a retired accountant in Vermont, and Walter is the case I want you to remember most. Walter went looking for answers online and did what a lot of intelligent, motivated people do. He bought supplements. A drawer full of them aimed at energy. CoQ10, which your mitochondria genuinely use to shuttle electrons. Some of the newer NAD-boosting compounds that have real laboratory research behind them. So, in fairness, several of those ingredients have legitimate mitochondrial science attached. But here's the thing Walter missed. A supplement can supply a raw material or a helper molecule, but it cannot supply the demand signal. And it is the demand signal, not the raw material, that tells the cell to build. Walter took them while continuing to sit for 11 hours a day, and he felt almost nothing. And he concluded that nothing works, and gave up. Walter's mistake is the one I flagged at the start. He tried to feed a factory that had no reason to run. Imagine stocking a warehouse with lumber and steel, while never once placing an order for anything to be built. The materials just sit there. Without the demand signal, the raw materials just sit there. Walter is the case that shows you cannot supplement your way past a switch that is turned off. So now let me give you exactly what to do in order starting this week. And I want to be clear before I begin. This is general educational information about physiology, not a prescription for you specifically. If you have heart disease, uncontrolled blood pressure, dizziness, or any diagnosed condition, talk to your physician before you change how you move. With that said, here is the sequence. Step 1. Ask your doctor about a lactate measurement, or at minimum, understand this one marker, because it is the one your standard fatigue panel almost never includes. Lactate is a substance your muscles produce when they are working beyond their easy energy supply. In people with poor mitochondrial capacity, lactate can climb faster and at lower effort because the power plants cannot keep up, so the cell falls back on a faster but far less efficient way of making energy that spills lactate as it goes. Well-trained mitochondria, by contrast, actually consume lactate as a fuel, clearing it back out of the blood, which is why fit people can work hard and keep their lactate low. You do not need to become an expert in it. You need to know that a resting or exercise lactate assessment is a window into cellular energy that thyroid and ferritin simply do not show. The same logic sits behind the fasting or resting metabolic markers a good physician can order. But lactate is the most direct read on whether your muscles are running on clean, efficient power or scrambling to keep up. If your basic labs are normal and you are still exhausted, this is a reasonable conversation to bring to your doctor. And most people have never once been offered it. Step 2. This is the heart of everything, and it directly targets the master switch. The single most reliable at-home signal for waking up PGC1 alpha is brief, repeated bursts of effort followed by recovery. Physiologists have shown that short intervals of harder work do far more to trigger mitochondrial building than the same total time spent at an easy, steady pace, precisely because the intervals drive your cell's fuel low enough to trip the AMPK alarm, while an easy pace never does. The work often cited here traces back to interval studies out of labs like Martin Gibala's at McMaster University, which found that just a handful of short, hard efforts several times a week produced mitochondrial gains comparable to far longer sessions of steady, moderate exercise. Here is the plain version, and you need no equipment at all. On a walk, or even walking up and down your own hallway, you go at a comfortable pace, and then for 30 seconds you push, faster or up a slope, hard enough that talking gets difficult. That talking test is not a gimmick. It is a rough field measure of the same threshold the lactate test reads in a lab. Then you slow down and recover for a full minute or two until you feel ready again. Then you repeat. 4 to 6 of those bursts is enough. That is the demand signal. That brief, honest difficulty is your muscles telling your cells, build more power plants. Step 3. Anchor that effort into your legs specifically, because your large leg muscles hold the most mitochondria and give you the biggest return. There is a particular reason the legs matter after 50, and it is the muscle fiber point I promised. You carry 2 broad kinds of muscle fiber: slow twitch fibers built for endurance and packed with mitochondria, and fast twitch fibers built for power. It is the fast twitch fibers that shrink and disappear fastest with age, a process called sarcopenia. And studies find people can lose a meaningful share of these fibers per decade after 50 if they are not being challenged. That selective loss is a large part of why the legs feel heaviest and why standing from a low chair starts to feel like work. The simplest version to fight it is the sit to stand. From a sturdy chair, you stand up and sit back down, slowly and with control, without using your hands if you safely can. A set of 10, rested, then another set a few times through, places real demand on the exact muscle fibers that vanish fastest after 50 and forces them to stay in the game. Remember Maria. The goal is not gentle repetition your body already knows. The goal is enough difficulty that the last 2 or 3 reps feel genuinely hard. That difficulty is the signal. Step 4. Protect the mitochondria you are building by moving briefly and often across the whole day. The most damaging pattern for cellular energy is long, unbroken sitting, which is exactly the trap Eleanor and Walter fell into. Research on prolonged sitting has found that the machinery your muscles use to pull sugar and fat out of the blood begins to quiet down within a couple of hours of stillness, and that this happens even in people who exercised earlier that day. Which is why a single morning workout does not buy you a free pass to sit for the next 10 hours. Every 30 to 60 minutes, stand up and move for even 1 to 2 minutes. This does not replace the bursts in step 2. It keeps the whole system awake between them so the switch never fully goes back to sleep and the enzymes that clear your bloodstream stay active. Set a timer if you need one. This single habit undoes the exact thing that made Eleanor worse after her clean lab report sent her to the couch. Step 5. Give the factory time and raw materials and do not sabotage the signal. This is where Walter went wrong in the other direction. Building new mitochondria takes weeks, not days, so measure this in months, not mornings. The first changes in mitochondrial enzyme activity begin within a couple of weeks of consistent effort, but the visible payoff, the day your walk stops feeling like wading through sand, tends to arrive somewhere around 6 to 8 weeks in, which is exactly the window where most people quit because they judged it too early. Prioritize protein at each meal to give your muscles what they need to rebuild. And here, the number matters, because the ability to turn protein into muscle blunts with age, a phenomenon called anabolic resistance. So many physiologists now suggest older adults aim higher, in the range of 25 to 30 grams of protein per meal to clear that threshold. And prioritize real sleep, because much of the repair and much of the mitophagy that clears out the damaged mitochondria happens overnight. And here is the mistake I promised you, the one I see almost nowhere. When tired people feel exhausted, the instinct is to rest completely and do less and less, which feels logical and is exactly backwards. Total rest tells the switch there is no demand, so it powers down further. So you get more tired, so you rest more. That is the fatigue spiral, the same feed-forward loop that pulled Eleanor down. And breaking it does not require punishing exercise. It requires the small, brief, honest demand in steps 2 and 3, done consistently. So your cells hear a reason to build. One optional add-on before I bring this home. If you want to make each burst count for more, temperature can help. Ending your shower with 60 to 90 seconds of genuinely cold water appears in the research to further activate that same master switch, partly by recruiting a heat-producing tissue called brown fat that is dense with mitochondria. The honest caveat matters, though. Cold exposure spikes blood pressure and sharply constricts vessels in the first seconds. So, if you have any cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, or a heart rhythm problem, you do not do this without clearing it with your physician first. Full stop. For many healthy adults over 50, it is a nearly free way to tell that dormant switch one more time. To build. Let me bring this all the way back to where we started, because I do not want you to leave with a pile of facts. I want you to leave with one clear thing to do. If you are over 50 and you are carrying a fatigue that sleep does not fix and your labs call normal, the problem may not be your thyroid, and it may not be your character. It may be a quiet master switch and a shortage of the tiny power plants that switch controls. And the switch is not broken, it is waiting for a signal. Brief, honest effort in your legs, movement scattered through your day instead of long hours in the chair, protein and sleep to supply the build, and the patience to measure it in weeks. That is the difference between the version of Eleanor who sat down for good and the version who could have gotten in the car and gone to that graduation. This is educational information, not medical advice, and it is not a substitute for your own physician who knows your history and can look at you directly. Please bring these ideas to them rather than around them. If this gave you a real thread to pull on, something more useful than move more and manage your stress, then do one small thing for me. Hit like and subscribe so this reaches one more tired person over 50 who has been told everything is fine and knows in their bones that it is not.